Good morning, and once again, thanks for being here today. I did forget one very special announcement earlier, and that is today is Sadie's birthday. This day is Sadie's birthday, so say hi to Sadie. Yeah, give her a round of applause there, and be sure and tell Sadie happy birthday. I always like to say, as a minister and as a preacher, that if you ever hear me saying something from up here, odds are I'm saying it to myself first and you all somewhere in there after that. Today is going to be especially one of those. And we'll begin with this phrase that we have memorized and we use all the time. We say, patience is a virtue. Yeah, patience is a virtue. And that last word in that phrase, virtue, gift, a quality that's good or a quality that is desirable in someone. And maybe that phrase sticks in our lexicon. Maybe that phrase sticks out to us so often because patience is one of those virtues that just seems so hard to come by. It's a difficult thing to learn. It's a difficult thing to practice. It's a difficult thing to be good at. One recent study done by scientists in Chicago found that a significant number of medical patients would choose a procedure or a medical device that was known to be less effective as long as they could have the procedure or the device sooner. In fact, in one study, a medical group offered a chance to win an at-home pulse oximeter, the little thing you put on your finger that tells how much oxygen's in your blood, which was a big thing during COVID to need to know if your oxygen levels were good or not. So in this study, they put out an opportunity to win a pulse oximeter for your house. Now, they did two drawings. One of them was specifically advertised as not the best one. It's okay. It's not the top of the line, but it will get things done, and you can register to win that one. You could also register the one that was advertised to be, this is the top of the line, this is the best one you can get, it's the most effective, it's the most precise, it's the best one on the market. When they were advertised at the same time with the drawings on the same day, only 13% of applicants applied for the inferior product. When they said the drawing for the less inferior product happened sooner than the better one, the percentage of applicants jumped to 25%. So 12% more people volunteered to win a lesser device just because they could get it sooner. Another study involved a trip overseas in which travelers would need to be treated against a disease that they could only get at this place that they were going. And they were offered two forms of medicine, a shot or a single pill to be swallowed with no pain whatsoever that would perform the exact same capability as the shot. When the two were offered at the same time, only 31% of people chose the shot. However, when they were told they could get the shot today or come back tomorrow and pick up the pill, 68% of people chose the shot. Just give it to me now. I'll take the pain. Forget that there's a difference. If I can get it now, I'll take it. From 31% to 68% just based on how soon they could get it. So not only are we impatient, we are so impatient that we're willing to take a more painful or less inferior product as long as we can get it now. Another measure of quantity of our ability to be patient involves our attention span. For how long can we focus on one thing without moving on to something else or without being distracted by something else? For a long time, the poor beleaguered goldfish has been our mark for this. We say things like, he has the attention span of a goldfish. On it for a couple seconds and then off to something else. Goldfish famously have low attention spans, just 9 seconds. 9 seconds, researchers think, a goldfish can focus on something else. As of the year 2000, the average human attention span was 12 seconds. Not great, but better than a goldfish. But if you can read the screen behind me. As of 2015, the average human attention span was measured at 8.25 seconds. Shorter than the goldfish. I think we owe the goldfishes of the world an apology at this point. We're impatient with our things, we're impatient with our time, we're impatient with our attention. We're also impatient with each other. If you want to know if you're a patient person or not, there are several ways to tell. One that I found most effective is get in a car with children. You can borrow mine if you don't have some, if you want to test yourself. How many of you ever had your parents tell you, I will turn this car around? Yeah, right? It is for this example right here. And in fact, I must confess, the other day I did that. Okay? And it gets worse. Not only did I threaten to turn the car around, we hadn't even left the driveway yet. And not only had we not left the driveway yet, I fulfilled the promise, and we unbuckled and got out of the truck and went back inside, and we didn't go anywhere. It was rough, right? John was having a particular bad day. I was having a particularly bad day. And if we have one more meltdown, son, we are going back inside, and we are not going to story time at the library today. And guess what? We had one more meltdown. And I said, that's it? We're going home. We're only in the driveway again. We are unbuckling, and we are going back in. This month, we're studying these mountaintop experiences, these moments in our lives where heaven and earth overlap. Maybe we get a glimpse of what's happening. Some people describe this as thin moments, the moments when the veil between heaven and earth is thin, and we can peek through, and we can get a glimpse of what's happening behind the scenes. Our title of this series is Holy Ground, and that title will come from our text today. Last week, we looked at what might be the thinnest of veils, the Garden of Eden, a place where God and his people walked hand in hand and side by side, a place where heaven and earth overlapped so incredibly so that we got a real good glimpse into what our relationship with God is like. That situation in Eden didn't last long, though. God's prized and cherished creation, the one created in his own image and filled with his very breath, chose to try to live without him very quickly, tried to become gods of their own lives. And there in that time and place, we find one of the fundamental traits of us as human beings and of God as God himself. And that is our propensity to hide and God's quest to find us. Today we jump forward to the next book of our Bible, the book of Exodus, the story of the burning bush, the story that provides us for, again, the name of our series, Holy Ground. So if you're here today and you have your Bible and you'd like to follow along, flip over to Exodus chapter 3. We're going to read every word of this story broken up into parts today, so I don't have the words on the screen because some of them would have been large sections. So I highly encourage you, if you want to follow along, if you've got your Bible on your phones, pull it up, or if you've got a Bible or a pew Bible, open up to Exodus chapter 3, and we'll read through this thing together. As you're turning there, it might help to set up the stage for where we're going to be here in Exodus chapter 3. This, of course, will be an incredibly influential and defining moment for Moses as a person. And there's a lot to take into account as we get to this story and Exodus chapter 3. We kind of need to understand Exodus 1 and 2 and where Moses came from and what he's like as a person. Moses was born a Hebrew. Moses was born an Israelite. During a particularly difficult time to be an Israelite and be a Hebrew, a time when there was an extermination of Hebrew babies going on. So Moses is born into this scenario. We have this famous baby in a basket story where Moses is placed in a basket and hidden away behind some reeds and pretended to be found in order to save him. Because of that scenario, he's adopted into the Egyptian society. And not just adopted into Egyptian society, but the highest of Egyptian societies, Pharaoh's own palace. So Moses is raised an Egyptian, but born a Hebrew. He has feet in both camps. One of the first stories that we get of Moses as an adult is about this conflicting nature within him, where he sees a Hebrew being abused by some Egyptians, and he takes matters into his own hands, and he decides to kill the Egyptian and bury him in the sand. That action catches up with him, and Moses runs. He's fleeing. And this is where we find Moses in Exodus chapter 3, fleeing while tending his father's herds. Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Okay, here we go. If we're talking about holy ground, we're talking about mountaintop experiences, we're talking about thin moments, this is what we tend to think about. This is what I tend to think about. This is literally a mountaintop experience. And not only a mountain, he's at Horeb, the mountain of God. So he is on the mountain of God. And we find this miraculous thing, this burning bush. Now, Moses would have been familiar with burning bushes. He's a shepherd, right? He's out here in the wilderness with these flocks currently. This is what he does. And no doubt, Moses made plenty of fires out there in the wilderness, and a bush is a good place to start a fire. But there's one thing about bushfires. They go up quick and they end quick. So you can use a bush to start a fire, but it's not good for sustaining one. So you start with a bush, and then you find some other stuff to pile on top to make yourself a fire. So Moses looks over, and he sees something that he's probably very familiar with, which is a bush fire. But there's a couple of interesting things about this one. First of all, there's nobody over there. Nobody's warming themselves by this fire. That's odd. How did that happen just by itself? But the thing that we're told that catches Moses' eye is not that there's a fire, not that a bush is on fire, not that nobody's by it, but that it's not burning up. I know those things. They start quick and they end quick. And this thing is just going. And this is the thing that Moses goes to investigate. He says, I'm going to go look at this thing because it's not burning up. It's existing. It's just going. So Moses is going to go check it out. We'll continue in verse 4. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to the bush, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Again, this is what I'm picturing if we're talking about holy ground moments, okay? We've got this miraculous thing. We've got this burning bush that just keeps going. It's just continuing to sustain itself. We've got a miraculous sight. We've got the presence of God here speaking Moses' voice out from underneath this flame. He calls to Moses and he says, Moses, and Moses says, Here I am. And God says, take off your sandals. Take off your sandals. This is a place of reverence. This is a place of holiness. This is a place of cleanliness. And strictly speaking, don't bring those dirty shoes over here, right? You've been wandering around in the wilderness serving these flocks. Who knows what's on your feet? Let's take those sandals off because this is a holy space. This is a clean space. Take your sandals off. God then pronounces his name. He says, I'm the God of your father. This name that God has become known by, ending out the book of Genesis and coming into Exodus, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And you know that moment when you get too close to a fire and it kind of singes your eyebrows a little bit and you have to turn and flinch. And Moses approaches the fire and God says, take your sandals off, and he reveals his name, and Moses says, that's too much. I'm too close. And he hides his face, and Moses bows. Oh, this is holy ground, right? This is the moment. This is pretty cool stuff. Let's keep going. Verse 7, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. God says, I saw the thing you saw, the thing that Moses took into his own hands. God says, I see it. I see the Egyptians that are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Not to hammer it too much, but let's recap it again. We've got a miracle. We've got this burning bush that just sustains itself. We've got a holy ground. We've got this pronouncement of God's name and his identity. We've got Moses bowing down before the presence of God. And we've got this incredible call on Moses' life. This quest that, if you think back to the setup of Moses' life, a thing that Moses and Moses alone is uniquely called and prepared to do. Born a Hebrew, raised in Egyptian society, one who knows both words, and one who, even though raised in the palace of Pharaoh, apparently has a real soft spot for his Hebrew people. Misplaced in his actions and how he chooses to handle it. But someone who absolutely identifies with his Hebrew people and knows both of these camps. This is a mountaintop experience like none other. What we would expect from an encounter like this, an encounter that frankly so many of us probably have asked for at one time or another. God, just show up and tell me what you want me to do. God, show up and tell me what the plan for my life is. And here is God, and he says, Moses, this is it. You have been born and raised for this moment. I see the Hebrew people, and I want you to go and rescue them. And what we expect, probably because we've seen a lot of movies, is we expect Moses to see this fire and to be just filled with awe and wonder and strength. And for God's hero to stand up and say, I got it. Let's go. Let me strap on the sandals. I'm your guy. We're going to do it. Not quite exactly what happens, though. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Okay. Not the response we were expecting. Okay? Not the response that we would have done in the movie. This is a big job, though. This is a big job. Moses has just fled Egypt, so he is currently fleeing Egypt. So he's not, in a big hurry to get back there. So he has a question. Why me? Why did you pick me? Who am I that I should do this? God has an answer. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you all will worship God on this mountain. You all will come back here, and you will worship here. But don't skip God's answer. Moses says, who am I that I should go do this? Who am I that you have picked me? And God's answer is, it's not about you. It's about me. And I'm going to go with you. Oh, that's such a great answer. So many times we ask God, God, why me? And God says it really doesn't have that much to do with you. It has to do with me. And I'm going to go with you. Moses has more questions, though. Verse 13. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites, and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Whew. If we haven't seen ourselves in Moses yet, we should right here. Because Moses starts a game that we love to play, and that's the what if game. What if? What if? What if? Moses says, well, what if I go and I tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me? And they say, what's his name? First of all, nobody has asked that yet. So far, at the end of Genesis, through the whole story of Genesis and into the beginning of Exodus, God has chosen to identify himself one way, the God of Abraham, then the God of Abraham and Isaac, and then the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is who he is known as. Moses, let's be clear, is not just asking questions. He's asking a very wild hypothetical question that nobody's going to ask. And if we wonder about that, God's going to tell us about it in just a minute. So Moses says, what if? God says, I got an answer for that too, beginning in verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you. I have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them, and after that he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. Moses says, okay, but if I tell them the God of your fathers comes and they ask me your name, what do I tell them? And God says, I am. Oh, this is so hard. This is so hard to translate. It's an unconjugated verb. It basically is like being. It's like existence. God says, I'm like the bush. I never go out. I was and I am and I will be, sustaining forever. There is no beginning. There is no end. I just am. But just in case you know, that's not going to be a question, because God immediately returns to his other name, the ones that he knows that they will know him by. He says, you can tell them, I am has sent you, but say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, has sent me to you. You heard that phrase several times in that answer. God is reiterating, this what if you asked is preposterous. They're not going to ask that question. They're going to know who I am when you say it. I want you to go. I have seen what's happened to the Israelites. I've heard them. I'm going to go rescue them. I want you to go, and I'm going to be with you. And then God does this thing that so often, again, we wish, and that God doesn't always do. God lays out the entire plan for Moses. He says, okay, we're going to play what ifs. Here you go. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to go with you. Pharaoh's going to need a strong hand. Don't worry, I've got one of those. I'm going to show him all the signs. And not only are you going to escape, you're going to be well off for it. I'm going to make sure that you guys have what you need to get started together. Okay. Moses has asked the questions. He's expressed some self-doubt. God says it's not about you. God lays out the entire plan, answered the what-if question. We're good to go, right? Verse 1 of chapter 4. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me? What if they don't listen to me? What if they say the Lord did not appear to you? All right, we're not done with the what ifs yet. Not done with the what ifs. And that's the problem with the what if game, right? They're like ruffles. You can't have just one. If you start down the what ifs, you're going to have 3 or 4. Moses isn't convinced yet. So, okay, that's all well and good. But what if? Nevertheless, God has an answer for that too. Verse 2, then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. I love that part. It makes me chuckle every time. Obviously, we're standing in front of a miracle. We've got the whole thing. God is speaking. God says, what's this in your hand? We go, oh, I got a staff. God says, throw it on the ground. Throws it on the ground, it becomes a snake. Moses screams and runs. I'm out. I don't do snakes. So God brings him back. It's okay. Pick it up by the tail. Nuh-uh. I'm not touching it. Yes, just pick it up by the tail. See what happens. Reach out your hand. So Moses reached out, he took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, here it is again, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So he put his hand in the cloak. When he took it out, the skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Now put it back in your cloak, he said. So Moses put it back. When he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first one, maybe they'll believe the second one. But if they do not believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. Moses is, what if this? And now there's what if this. And I love this whole exchange because God is preempting the rest of the answers. God knows us. God knows Moses. And once we start on the what if train, it's hard to stop. And so God says, all right, guess what? I'll give you a sign. And just in case Moses says, but what if they don't believe that one? God says, I'm going to give you a second one. And guess what? We're going to have another one. So we have a plan, and then we have a backup plan, and then we have a plan to back up that one, just in case we can cover the what ifs. All right. So we have a miracle. We have God's revelation of his identity. We have a unique call on Moses' life. We've answered the questions. We've got the what ifs down. We're going, right? Not quite. Verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. Oh boy. We're back to the first question. Moses says, who am I? God says, it's not about you, it's about me. I'm going to go with you. Moses says, what if, what if, what if? God answers all the questions. Moses is still not convinced, so he goes back to, well, again, it's who am I? I don't talk too good. I don't speak very well. Oh, and I love God's answer at this in verse 11. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. Moses says, I can't talk. And God says, I made that mouth. I know what it does. And I made your mouth, and I know what yours does, and I know what yours doesn't do. Now trust me, just go. Just go. I've answered the questions. Just go. Is anyone else's patience running thin yet as we go through this story? We talk about this all the time, but when we break up this story and you just keep thinking, okay, now Moses is going to go, and he doesn't. Okay, that's pretty incredible. He's got to believe it now, and he doesn't. And Moses just asks and asks and asks. And I read this story this morning, and I think, how patient is our God? How patient is this God? I'm done. I don't know about you. I'm done at this point. I would have turned the car around a long time ago. We wouldn't have even left the driveway at this point. I'm turning it around. We're shutting it off. We're done. Extinguish the flame. We're going to go pick somebody else. I'm tired of the questions. Even here, standing in front of this miracle, hearing the voice of God himself describe this plan for which Moses is uniquely qualified, Moses says, I've got a few questions, though. And one by one, excuse after excuse, God sits and he listens and he answers. And he provides backup answers in case those aren't quite significant enough. Moses says, who am I to do this? God says, it's not about you, it's about me, and I'm going with you. What if they don't believe me? What if they ask about who you are? What if? Well, I can't speak very well. And none of this changes God's mind. None of this changes God's plan. None of this changes God's desire to use Moses in this way. I think we have this misconception sometimes that being a follower of Jesus is having it all figured out. It's knowing the answers at all times so that if anyone comes to us and asks us, we'll have an answer for it. And we can take this thing we have called faith and we can box it up nice and neat, and we can be able to share it with other people and say, look, we figured it out. Here it is. If you want to know the answers, just open it up. And if we don't have it figured all out at all times, we think we've missed something. Or that if we ask too many questions, God is going to change his mind about us. If we show too much doubt, God's going to change his mind about who we are. What we've seen so far in our two holy ground moments is the exact opposite of that sentiment that we so often live in. In Genesis chapter 3, we find God's pursuit of us. And in Exodus chapter 3, we find God's patience with us. This life is not about having all the answers. It is not about having everything figured out. It's about putting our faith in the one who does. Living in faith, hear this please, living in faith means there will be questions. That's what living in faith means. That's what living in faith is. It means facing the unknown with those questions in mind, but keep going. Exodus 3 teaches us to ask those questions. We might get annoyed with Moses. God sits there and answers them. But God, I don't know, I'm not very good at that. God says, I am. I'm going with you. But God, I can't do that. God says, I can, and I'm going with you. But what if they do this? God says, I got a plan for that. But what if they don't do this? I got a plan for that. God answers the questions. God is patient enough to sit there and answer every question we have. Sit there. Oh, and God is patient enough to sit there while we stare at a miracle and not comprehend it. While we sit there staring at God's call for our lives and going, but God, I don't know. There's a lot of questions to be answered. God says, ask them. There's one more little passage in this story before we move on to something else. God is going to become angry with Moses, finally. But I want us to hear why. Beginning in verse 13. Actually, let's go back. Let's start in verse 11, and let's get the catch up here. Let's build our momentum. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. But Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Then Moses says, please send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. That's a great burning bush pun, by the way. Right? Don't forget where we are right now. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. Again, we're already anticipating more questions. What about your brother? Well, he's a long ways away. God says he's already headed this way. Well, he and I may not be on exactly good terms. God says he's going to be happy to see you. We're going to figure it out. I will help both of you speak, and I will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs. Moses is over the pretense now, right? None of his questions or his excuses have provided him with the opportunity to bow out. God has an answer for everything he has to bring at him. God answers everything, and now Moses is going to cut to the chase. In essence, Moses says, I don't want to do it. Go send somebody else. Pardon your servant, Lord. Go send somebody else. And it's then that God finally becomes angry with Moses. Then, in essence, what God is saying is, as long as we're here and we're figuring this thing out together, ask all the questions you want. Ask them. I'll answer them. Doubt yourself, we can work on that. Doubt me, let me convince you. Just don't quit. Just don't quit the fact that wherever you are, I've uniquely prepared you for this time and place for something that I'm going to ask you to do. It's only when Moses asks God to send someone else that his patience even begins to wane. But even in that moment of anger, even when God becomes angry with Moses, the plan doesn't change. God does not give up on Moses. God does not quit. God's patience exists up until even the point that Moses says, I don't want to go, send somebody else. God gets angry, but God says, I've got a plan for that too, and I'm going to tell you, you're not going to do it alone, so Aaron's going to come with you. If you feel like you've exhausted God's patience, you haven't. You can't. You cannot. God is patient. God will answer the questions. God will sit by as we stare at a miracle and go, God, I'm not really sure. And God says, I am. Ask all the questions. Let's go. All that God asks of us is to keep standing there. Keep asking the questions. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. Just don't quit on me. Just don't quit. I'll tell you what, even if you try, the plan still doesn't change. This life, the temptation for us in this life is to pretend like we have the answers, to feel bad when we don't, to question things. And when we question things, go, maybe I shouldn't have done that. God says, it's not about you figuring it out. I just want you to have faith in me because I'm the one who does. If we can help you in that journey this morning, please come and find me. I'd be happy to pray with you as we stand, and Josh leads us in one more song.